year, this summer, I'm working on communication difficulties, detrimental effects of dementia. I want to thank the McNair program, Dr. Louise, my mentor, Dr. John Osankopon. He was our instructor last summer. Dr. Ned, Dr. Richie, of course, and this McNair Achievement Program. Let us look at communication effects, communication difficulties, detrimental effects of dementia. So dementia causes memory loss and affects communication. And then with this overview, we're going to look at how it includes the impairment of at least one cognitive function as the language affects here, how it affects affected individuals completely depend on other people for daily living, and how a part of the brain called the hippocampus affects language performance. So dementia, according to Briggs et al. 2017, is the memory impairment including impairment of at least one cognitive function affecting people 65 years and over. Why am I having this research in the first place? The rationale is that Cohen et al. 2019 reported that in the early stages of dementia, there may be changes in language patterns. So these patients affected with dementia, they will be just bubbling up, they don't know what they're saying, they don't understand, they can't even write, they don't speak well, because a part of the hippocampus is affected. And it happens with people who suffer from dementia, which is a brain disorder. Steady rationale. So dementia involves progressive degradation of language functioning, which affects language performance and communication, which is what we're actually looking at today. What is the effect actually of this research? Cohen et al. 2019 again reported that under early stages of dementia, there may be changes in language patterns. What are some of the symptoms? Difficulties in finding words, objects, or remembering names of close relations. Imagine your grandma doesn't remember your name anymore. You are Brittany, and she says you are Charlotte. It's disturbing. It affects people around the affected patients, and it makes life difficult for the family members. So what are some of the difficulties, since we just mentioned difficulty? For most patients with dementia, language difficulties are a major problem, especially as the disease progresses to the severe stage. We have the onset, it gets to the middle stage, it gets to the severe stage. So what is the problem? Personalities of affected persons change. Their personalities change. They are not able to control the emotions. And then if you have a family member affected with dementia, you know that they wander about. They get lost in the community. So what is the diagnostic to brain scans, including MRI, CT scan, and precision emission tomography, that is the PET scan, which show activities of the brain, and this can be used in diagnosing dementia. So what happens to these people? Fear of social situations. It causes embarrassment, and it causes loneliness, feeling of loneliness. They feel like they're in their own world, right? They don't understand what goes on around here. Individuals feel shame when referred to as demented, the sufferers. They are demented, like you have brain problems. So what is the benefits of this research? Relatives and caregivers of people living with dementia, this research is going to help them. How can we do a lot of prevention? Early detection is important in developing early social and medical support, and this allows for early therapeutics which may prevent the progression of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is one of the most prevalent forms of dementia. And so the findings, this study will analyze if damage to some part of the brain causes dementia and if it affects language performance, which is why we are here today. So my methods This time around, because post-COVID is here, we're talking of people who are suffering with dementia. It gets to the stage where they cannot communicate well because the hippocampus is affected. How do I collect my data? Very difficult. They can't understand me. They can't speak. So my population of interest is people living with dementia whose language performance is affected. If it's affected, it's a problem to do with them. And so the only available method I could use for this research today is secondary research. That is literature review. So sampling method is literature review of scholarly articles and journals. And then no primary research was conducted due to COVID-19. And then I had a secondary research for this. So literature review, description of the cognitive process. We're talking of this is a cognitive disease. So description of the cognitive impairment on clinical and non-clinical patients. There are people who are actually admitted in the hospital, people who have been researched on, there are people who have been taken care of at home. So these are non and then clinical and non-clinical, and then I did a research review. And so let us look at description of the cognitive process. Dementia describes a category of medical conditions, including a series of symptoms associated with decline in thinking and memory skills. The most well-known of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. We all know a lot of Alzheimer's disease. So now let us describe the cognitive process. According to Briggs et al. 2017, everybody knows I like to quote a lot. Yes, because Alzheimer's disease over time, it destroyed the connection between the cells. So let us take something from here. It destroyed the connection between the cells in the brain. As the cells die, Briggs et al. Continue to tell us that this brain shrinks and its efficiency to perform cognitive function decline. Now we got what we want. That is what caused language deformity. So description of cognitive impairment on clinical and non-clinical population. At the time of clinical manifestation, even at the time of doctors analyzing, this is actually what is going on with you. Dementia, we have Edwards et al. 2011 says there is already significant irreversible brain damage present. There is nothing we can do about the damage when happens to the brain. It is irreversible. Now, the changes in the white matter of the brain, this interests me a lot, have been reported associated with Alzheimer's disease and amnestic mild cognitive impairment. So we can talk of affecting communication, language performance, and that was what made people have difficulty communicating with others when we talk of people having dealt with dementia. Now, description of cognitive impairment on clinical and non-clinical. So across the section analysis, when until 2012, there was a cross-section analysis which was carried out and was using diffusion tensor imaging to measure changes in the white matter of the brain. This is what I rely on now because I did not collect my own data. So they used tensor imaging to measure the changes in the white matter of the brain. The assessment on whole brain diffusion tensor imaging, magnetic MRI, that is magnetic resonance imaging, and neuropsychological were made. So all these things were carried out, and then track-based spatial statistics was used to measure diffusion images, the mean, and compare between the group with different disorders and the control. People who don't have dementia and people who do have dementia, all these tests were carried out. Let us look at what happened. So now brain volume was then estimated on structural images. Now their results show that the mild cognitive impairment group showed lower fractional anystrophy and higher radial deficit than the control group. So these are all the terms that lead to language deformity. According to Wang et al., the findings, what they found, the findings which I am basing my argument on here, were consistent with previous results that shows that changes in para-hippocampal, we come back to hippocampus, white matter in the mild cognitive impairment in Alzheimer's disease. So this was consistent with the previous results. Now, Kong et al. 2019 reported that in the early stages of dementia, there may be changes in language patterns, and this condition may worsen as the disease progresses. So we have damage to the frontal lobe of the brain, which causes problem with intelligence, behavior. That is why they wander, they're in their own world, they don't know what goes on around, and then the reasoning and their judgment. And then we also have that using clinically diagnosed dementia patients, Lickberg 2012 explains that the hippocampal subfields become more vulnerable to degenerating in people with dementia. So now let's look at the findings. Structural TI-MRI resonance images were taken from the hippocampal sections and analyzed in terms of their shapes and compared with the control. Now let's look at what happened. The findings of the study, according to Lickberg et al. 2012, showed that the whole of the left side of the hippocampus had a severe atrophy in the patient with cemented dementia. This is where we start now. Now, there was severe atrophy in the whole left side of the hippocampus, which was associated with language performance in people with dementia. That is where we get to now. Now, let's move on. Let's get to discussion. Edwards et al. 2010 explained that dementia is not a normal part of aging. People feel like once you're age 65, you should have dementia. No, it's not a normal part. But it's a brain disorder, like I said initially. And then they continue to say that the hippocampus is one of the first areas of the brain to be affected by dementia. So using clinically diagnosed dementia patients with control, they analyze the shape of the hippocampus, and there is the degeneration of the frontotemporal lobe. Now, let us look at it. It's estimated that the prevalence of dementia is about 6% to 10% of persons older than 65 years and above, and heavy smokers at risk. And then aphasia is the condition that affects people's ability to communicate and understand language. So we have patients with dementia have difficulties reading and writing, like we talked about. They wander around and get lost in the familiar neighborhood. Suffering sometimes become aggressive. So if your grandmother has dementia, they frighten you, and you're screaming, "Grandma, stop!" No, forgive them. They are in their own world. They don't get it. The hippocampal is affected. Yeah. Sure. So the limitation is that due to the pandemic, there was no face-to-face interview conducted, and then this secondary research was performed. Thank you for your time. I will take questions, please. Who died? Good to see you.
So my question is, what's the difference between aphasia and atrophy?
Aphasia and what?
Atrophy.
Okay, so aphasia is the inability of someone to communicate effectively due to the deformity of the brain. And then atrophy is like somebody who has lied down for a very long time on the left side, and there is the muscle weakness and the death of it. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, so it's like half of your body's kind of like muscle weakness.
I just use that for an example. Maybe it's people with stroke.
Okay.
Atrophy has something to do with the dead cells over time. And then this has to do with the hippocampus getting affected and the brain cells shrinking and affecting communication.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome, honey. I'll take 2 more questions. Please go ahead.
Why have you decided to look at the hippocampus for effect to language rather than like areas like the Wernicke's or Broca's area?
Because we talk of language deformity. we cannot talk of kidney or the heart or the liver. It is the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that is affected. And that is why segments of them, when we use the diffusion tension to do the research, we found out that the whole left part of the hippocampus was deformed. So it is the part of the brain which actually goes through deformity first for it to generate into inability to communicate effectively. Did I answer the question? Thank you. I'll take one more question, please. Yes, thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I've seen a documentary on geriatric patients with dementia listening to music from their younger years and helping them communicate. Is there any research that's shown kind of like how that works, and have you learned about that at all?
Thank you. I'm a musician. I write songs and I compose and I sing. I record. So in my next line of research, I'm going to work on that. Because music is spirits. Music heals. Something is like I'm talking, but as the words come out, they form into song. It's movement in the air. So definitely, if nothing works, music just might work. Thank you for giving me a line of title for my next research. Thank you, guys.
I just wanted to know what's the difference between. Oh, you're fine. What's the difference between white matter and gray matter?
I think white matter specifically has to do with the side of the brain which is associated with hippocampus. And I've not done a lot of. It's been a long time I did my biology. I've not done a lot of research about gray matter. But then I did a lot on white matter, and I know that it is associated with hippocampus and the parts of the brain which deals with cognitive functions like language, aphasia, and the rest. Did I answer your question? Say I will come later and get answers for the gray matter.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Honestly, that was the same question that I had. It became very apparent that there was a focus on white matter of the brain in the earlier part of your presentation.
Yes.
And then towards the end, I feel as if we did not, or you did not tie it back in. It did not help us, or it wasn't presented at all in your findings or in your conclusion. So that was my question also for you to speak about what is white matter and how is it connected to the findings that you had in Nathan?
Oh, okay. Thank you. I will look into that. But then, remember when the white matter volume was measured after the diffusion tensor analysis, it was realized that the volume was decreased. It was shrink, and then this shrinking and these deformities, it was actually eventually lead to language deformity and to finally communication difficulty.